Welcome to the Dirt on Growing, where we don't just plant seeds, we plant ideas that challenge the norm. I'm your host, Brandon Rust from Full Crop Sciences, and this is the podcast where living soil meets real science. From worm castings to bottled nutrients, microbial inoculants, and chemical pesticides, we're here to question the trends, break down the data, and empower your grow. It's time to think deeper and grow better. Welcome, everybody, to the Dirt on Growing podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Rust, and today we're going to be talking about yellowing leaves. We've all experienced it, but how do we fix it? That is what I'm going to be talking about today. But to understand the right way to fix yellowing leaves, we have to figure out why they are yellowing in the first place. So I wanted to kind of break this down into a couple of different sections. One is going to be nutrients, one is going to be environment, and water. So the first thing that I think about when I'm thinking about yellowing leaves is nitrogen deficiency. And one of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about any type of deficiency, nutrient deficiency, is where that deficiency is starting. And this is important because nutrients that are mobile internally inside of the plant can be translocated from the bottom parts of the plant to the tops of the plant where they're needed in higher quantities. However, immobile nutrients do not have the ability to translocate to higher parts. So wherever they're at in the plant, they stay in the plant. So understanding if a nutrient is mobile or immobile can help you understand what nutrient you're potentially dealing with. So in the case of nitrogen, which is typically the number one thing that I see when someone comes to me and asks me what could be potentially causing these yellowing leaves. Because nitrogen is mobile, what it will do is it will pull nitrogen from the lower parts of the leaves. It'll pull that nitrogen out of those leaves and it'll transport it to the higher upper parts of the plant where it's needed more. In doing so, what happens is those bottom parts actually become deficient and you'll start seeing the yellowing occur from the bottom up. So whenever you have a nutrient deficiency with a mobile nutrient, it'll always occur from the bottom up. It will typically occur that way. In the case of nitrogen, it's really easy to identify. Typically, it just starts off with yellowing. It doesn't have interveinal chlorosis. If you're also experiencing interveinal chlorosis or the leaf edges burning, that's an indication that it's something nitrogen and something else. But typically nitrogen will just be the plant will start to yellow. Eventually those leaves will start to die. They'll become necrotic and then they'll fall off. That is really easy to correct. If it is just nitrogen, the action that you would take to correct that is to simply add an input that contains nitrogen. For me, it would be something like the high-end nitrogen humate, but there are other things like amino acids, whether that's from soy protein hydrolysate or fish amino acids. Those are both really good organic amendments that are high in nitrogen. Also, blood meal is a really great nitrogen source. Soybean meal. You could use alfalfa meal, although alfalfa usually has 2 or 3%, and it takes a lot longer to break down. You also have inorganic amendments like diammonium and monoammonium phosphate that is going to bring in phosphorus as well. You have calcium nitrate, which will bring in nitrate, but it'll also bring in calcium. You have urea, which will only bring in nitrogen. Regardless of however you're growing, if you're having a nitrogen deficiency, you want to correct it. And you have to remember nitrogen deficiency, if you're seeing deficiency, it's already, 50% into that deficiency. So you have to take corrective measures. But whenever you see a nitrogen deficiency, you know that you are already in the process of losing biomass production, and you're losing photosynthetic capacity in veg, and the same thing, you can lose crop quality, you can lose yields if you're deficient in nitrogen in flowering. However, too much nitrogen in flowering will decrease yields. That's a topic for another episode. Some other ways, or some other things that'll cause leaves to turn yellow, is iron deficiency. So iron is another photosynthetic nutrient, and iron is very, very tricky as far as it as a nutrient. And the reason why it's tricky is because it's needed in its reduced form, or its divalent form, which is its ferric form. So ferric iron, ferrous sulfate, you can get ferrous sulfate, which is iron sulfate, to correct iron deficiency. But the problem with iron is that it oxidizes so easily. And you guys have probably heard me talk about how iron oxidizes in these types of media into oxidized iron, or what we see as rust. What we would see if we had an iron nail and we put it in that soil and we brought it out, that red is iron oxide. It's oxidized iron. The plant can't use that in that form. And so there are a couple of things you can do to make sure that you're getting enough iron. One of them I spoke about, which was iron sulfate, which is a naturally occurring mineral. Now you can add iron sulfate into your media to correct iron deficiency and to kind of green up that plant. Iron deficiency doesn't usually start at the bottom. It usually is a whole plant symptom where everything starts to get a little bit pale and it's just not looking as vibrant and as lush. Now, there are certain microbes, Trichoderma and Bacillus subtilis, work very efficiently to produce a secondary metabolite, which are called hydroxymate siderophores. They have a high affinity for iron and will grab onto iron and keep it from oxidizing. That means it will organically complex that iron and keep it in a metabolically available form for the plant. So that is one way to increase the efficiency of the iron that is in a system. There is also, I mentioned blood meal. There is iron in blood meal. Typically, we're using it for a nitrogen amendment, but also blood meal has a good amount of iron, which can help with iron acquisition if you're using that as an amendment in an organic system. Also, there are EDTA, or chelated iron. Now, I'm not a big proponent of chelated nutrients. They're usually synthetically derived, and then that chelate lasts a long time in the environment, and it will bind with other elements in the soil as that iron is accumulated in the plant. And so I don't recommend it, although it is very efficient for getting iron into the plant very quickly. So those are my things. Really, the combination of the iron sulfate and microbes is the best combination, because even if the iron isn't in a form that's readily available to the plant, let's say that iron sulfate is in an unavailable form, those microbes can transform and reduce that iron into an available form and then chelate it with those siderophores. So the combination of, for me personally, I like iron sulfate and using microbes. That little combination there for iron uptake, improved iron uptake, which improves photosynthetic capacity of the plant because iron is a photosynthetic nutrient. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was sulfur. Sulfur looks very much like iron deficiency, where you'll see whole plant yellowing. Typically, sulfur will actually start at the top, but in my experience, I've noticed that you can see whole plant yellowing as well. Usually starts at the top, where it's more defined at the top, but you're seeing yellowing over the whole plant. They're really easy remedies to fix sulfur. Now, it's not elemental sulfur that the plant is observing, it's sulfate in its sulfate form, its reduced form. And elemental sulfur, if you use that, if you try to correct sulfur deficiency, you could end up dropping your pH if you use. So I don't recommend using elemental sulfur. And elemental sulfur will drop the pH, but microbes will attack it and convert it into sulfate. But also, what can happen is they can convert those into sulfide and like hydrogen sulfide compounds in anaerobic conditions. So I don't ever recommend it unless you're doing specific applications for pH reduction and you're using data. The best way to get sulfur into your system is through many of the different type of sulfate minerals. Now, sulfate is always attached to something else like calcium, magnesium, potassium, zinc, iron, copper, or manganese, right? So any one of those amendments that you use, maybe you're using Epsom salt magnesium sulfate as an additive or as a foliar application, like I talk about a lot, that's going to bring in sulfate, right? Plant sulfate. So typically when you're using products like those that have sulfates in it, you don't run into that problem. Oftentimes, more than not, when I've seen sulfur deficiency, it's because the person has used a lot of organic amendments that don't contain high amounts of sulfur when they're making their media, and they're kind of neglecting things like the micronutrient sulfates or things like calcium sulfate, which is gypsum, or potassium sulfate. When they're mainly making media that is meal based and they're not using those mineral bases in their media. If you're using any of the micronutrient sulfates, Epsom salt, gypsum, or potassium sulfate, you're typically not going to have any problem with sulfur deficiency. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was overwatering, right? Because overwatering, if you want to learn a little bit more about that, the last episode that we did, you can check out that episode. It's posted on the YouTube channel. Overwatering can create anaerobic and anoxic zones where anaerobic microorganisms start to proliferate. They can produce metabolites that can damage cell root hairs, especially those fine root hairs, which when damaged, you're getting less uptake of, your base cations and things like nitrogen and phosphorus. And so when you're it reduces the plant's ability to uptake nutrients, and you can see overall yellowing. And it's not caused by specific nutrient. It's caused by basically the plant kind of shutting down. It switches to anaerobic metabolisms, just like the microorganisms in that media, and energy is reduced by about 90%. And so it's happening in those conditions where you have anaerobic soils and all of the oxygen that the roots would have access to if it wasn't waterlogged, all those metabolic processes slow down and stop. And so the plant is just kind of slowly dying because it's still being, it's still trying to photosynthesize. There's energy coming into the system, but it's not able to have any of those metabolic processes, being functional because it's not getting nutrients, not taking up the nutrients. And so that's another thing that can cause plant yellowing. And it's not always super severe, and it's not always super recognizable, the overwatering aspect. You might accidentally think that it is some type of nutrient problem, right? And so you're like, oh, I don't know. Watering can be an art form when it comes to, you can also make it a science where you can figure out what field capacity is and never water over 60% of that is. And you can do that by weighing the pot before and after you water, figuring out how many liters or milliliters of water did you add into that pot or into that bed. So you can figure those numbers out, or you can, do it like an art form where you're basically looking at the soil, you're feeling it. But overwatering can look like nutrient deficiencies, but what's happening is roots are actually becoming damaged and they're not able to uptake nutrients. And lastly, one of the last thing that usually comes into my mind when I'm looking at plants that are yellowing is light intensity. Now, it wasn't so much back when I was using high intensity discharge lights like metal halide and high pressure sodium or even CMH. But with the advent of LED and how efficient they are, what I've seen a lot, this is almost the majority of the time, is that the light intensity is too high. And so what happens is when you increase the light intensity, whether it's due to heat or just too much light, the plant's metabolisms are starting to fire up. And what happens is you're getting these oxygen reactive species, these free oxygen radicals within the cells that can tear apart compartments of the plant. And so the plant's, not able to function properly. It's having to produce oxygen reactive species that can neutralize those free radical oxygen species to stop that cellular decay internally. And then also because, those processes are speeding up, the rate in which the plant would need nutrients in that part of the plant where it's receiving all that light is expedited too, right? So if you're not getting enough nutrient uptake through mass flow and not enough evapotranspiration going through that plant, let's say your environment is off, too much light is going to have a negative effect on that plant. And what you'll see is you'll start to see the tops yellow at first, but you'll see an overall decrease in plant health, in plant vigor. And if it's prolonged and you do it throughout the system, you're going to see a decrease typically in yield. You're going to see a decrease typically in quality as well. And so that's a really simple fix. And if you're running into an issue and you think it's nutrient derived, but you're using, let's say, a 700 watt LED and you're at 80%, try dialing it down to 40%. That's one of it's a pro tip. If you're having an issue in your grow and you can't really identify exactly what it is or put your finger on what it is that problem is, try dimming your lights and see if there's a positive reaction and then take it from there, because it could just be your light intensity is too high. So as a review, the main things that I see from yellowing is going to be nitrogen deficiency, nutrient deficiency like iron and sulfur, and too much light, and overwatering. So those are the categories of the things that I will look at if that is happening. Those, and I'm saying there might be some other reason, but typically those things, so nutrients, overwatering, or light, are the main things for me that I look at first when if I'm diagnosing something visually. So that's my little spiel. I'm going to open it up. I appreciate everybody joining me here on the chat. Make sure you guys go to the bokashiearthworks.net page to grab any of the products that you need for your garden. Q&A time. If you guys have questions about, yellowing in plants and you want to hear my opinion on it, drop a comment or a question in the comments section and I will get to those. Okay, so here is a comment. It says from Alien Garden Genetics, the soil was bringing my pH way below 6, and that caused a lot of yellowing and stunted growth. So pH is important, regardless of what people say. Usually water pH is not as important as media pH because your media can buffer. But when we're talking about a modified growing mix, so a living soil, a peat or cocoa with compost base soil, they are naturally acidic. So peat is naturally acidic. And because there's so much organic matter and so much biology, The microbes are constantly producing organic acids and enzymes that reduce the pH of that soil. And as cations like potassium, calcium, and magnesium are uptaken from that media into the plant, that'll also drop the pH. So using something like the calcium silica, which will buffer that pH and it will stabilize that pH from dropping, is something that I recommend. Trent's Got a Garden asked, does iron deficiency present itself both in veg and flowering with similar appearance? Yes, it can. However, oftentimes what you'll see in the flowering stage, especially if you're further on in flowering, is the yellowing will occur closest to the leaves that are next to the calyxes. And then iron deficiency is most likely to show up when the plant is photosynthesizing a lot and putting a lot of biomass. So mid to late veg, when the plant is really putting on a lot of biomass, and then that first couple of weeks of flowering is when it's most likely going to show up. And it's one of the reasons why, if you look at the biocrop steering protocols, you add a certain consortium of microorganisms, Trichoderma and Bacillus subtilis, at those specific points. So mid veg, transition, and then about 2 weeks into flowering. And it's because you're stimulating the uptake of iron with those specific microorganisms at those specific times when the plant is going to have the most rapid growth cycles or growth periods. Been growing for years and have been learning a lot from you. Thank you. Yep, we're going to be doing a lot of garden updates too. So on the YouTube channel, I have the podcast, which we don't do smoking on. I'm not doing anything like that. You're not going to see pictures of plants, but I will have another series which will be a daily vlog updates on what's going on in the actual garden, and you guys can follow along on that. I'll also drop little educational tidbits, but I'll try to do 2 to 3 minute videos for the shorts on those. Yeah, calcium silica is really great. It buffers pH. And the cool thing about the calcium silica, right? So 43% calcium, so twice as much calcium than gypsum. 51% silica, 1.7% magnesium, and 0.2% iron. So it's got a little bit of iron. It's got a little bit of magnesium in there as well. But if we don't have any other questions, I'll wrap it up by saying thank you. I appreciate you guys joining. Make sure you guys sign up for our newsletter, which can also get you exclusive access to our sales and coupon calendar throughout the year. And it will also give you access to our weekly newsletter, and it'll give you updates to what we got going on with Full Crop Science. Got another question here. I'll get to this one. Off topic, but how to deal with fungus gnats using microblift at 5 milliliters per gallon. How long should I water in microblift to eliminate gnats after top pots have dried enough to water again? That's a good question. So it's really contingent on how high of insect pressure you have. Typically, what I'll do, if I run into a situation where I have an explosion or there's a lot, or I run into a situation where I'm consulting with somebody and they're like, dude, I top dress amended, there's tons of fungus gnats right now, or I brought in this soil and now there's fungus gnats everywhere. 10 milliliters per gallon, it's a lot, way higher than the dosage rate. But what happens is you do that one time and it'll usually wipe all those fungus gnat larvae out. You can water in again if you feel like you need to in a couple of days, but typically that's enough, and you only need to water in every couple of weeks. So anyway, that's my time for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned. Make sure you guys go check out the website. If you enjoy these lives, the best way to support us is going to the website and getting some of the products. So I'll see you guys soon. Till next time.